The note wasn't meant for him, but once Casimir's fingers closed around the crumpled paper that had fallen from the young woman's bag, he knew he would never let her go. He'd been standing in the shadows of the Metropolitan Museum's north wing when she'd stumbled past him, her canvas messenger bag spilling its contents across the marble floor. Pens, lipstick, a worn paperback, and that folded square of notebook paper that landed directly at his feet. She'd been rushing, flustered, gathering everything with frantic hands while apologizing to no one in particular. She hadn't seen him there in the alcove, hadn't noticed when he'd bent down with supernatural speed to retrieve the note before she could. By the time she'd collected her things and hurried away, Casimir had already read the words 3 times. "Marcus, I can't keep pretending I don't feel this way. Every time you walk past my desk, every time you smile at me in the break room, my heart does something I can't control. I know this is crazy. I know we work together and that makes everything complicated. But I think about you constantly. If you feel even a fraction of what I feel, meet me at the fountain in Central Park on Friday at sunset. If you don't come, I'll understand. I'll bury these feelings and we'll go back to normal. But I had to try. I had to tell you. Ren." Casimir stood motionless in the shadows for a long moment, the paper between his pale fingers, his dark eyes fixed on the name signed at the bottom. Ren. He looked up, tracking her scent through the museum corridors, even as she disappeared around a corner. Orange blossom and vanilla, with an underlying note of nervousness, anxiety perhaps. The sweet, warm fragrance of human blood pumping just beneath her skin. He shouldn't have cared. In his 4 centuries of existence, Casimir Draculesht had witnessed countless human dramas, their brief passionate lives flickering past like candle flames. As the vampire king of the Eastern Americas, he had responsibilities far weightier than the romantic hopes of one mortal woman. The treaty negotiations with the European courts, the growing unrest among the younger vampires who chafed under the old laws, the constant vigilance required to keep their existence hidden from the human world, these were the matters that should occupy his mind. But something in those words had struck him with unexpected force. The raw honesty, the courage it must have taken to write them, the vulnerability of putting such feelings onto paper. He found himself folding the note carefully and slipping it into the inner pocket of his coat, right against where a heart would beat if he were still human. He wanted to know her, needed to know her. And if he was being honest with himself, which he rarely bothered to be, he wanted to be the one she gave that note to. Casimir left the museum as evening settled over New York City, his long black coat trailing behind him like wings. The city was his domain, though few humans realized it. Beneath the streets and skyscrapers, in penthouses and converted churches, in the labyrinthine tunnels of the old subway system, vampires lived and thrived. He'd built this kingdom over 200 years, ever since he'd arrived from the Carpathian Mountains with nothing but his title and his ambition. Now he ruled over 3,000 of his kind, maintaining the delicate balance between their world and the human one. It was exhausting work, thankless at times, but it was his purpose, his duty. His father had been a king before him, and his father before that, stretching back to a time when vampires ruled openly and humans knew to fear the night. But tonight, duty felt distant. Tonight, he had a name and a scent, and the memory of a woman with dark auburn hair gathered in a messy bun, wearing a green dress that brought out the hazel in her eyes. He'd only glimpsed her for seconds, but the image was burned into his mind with perfect vampiric clarity. He returned to his residence, a Gothic revival mansion tucked behind iron gates in the Upper East Side, its true age hidden behind historical preservation paperwork and legal fictions. His second-in-command, Lucian, was waiting in the study, his white hair pulled back severely from his pale face, his expression concerned. "The Western delegation is growing impatient," Lucian said without preamble. "They want your answer about the blood-sharing arrangement." "Let them wait." Casimir moved to the window, looking out over the city lights. "What do you know about human courtship rituals? Modern ones?" Lucian blinked, clearly thrown by the question. "I'm sorry?" "If a human woman wanted to express romantic interest in a man, how would she do it?" "Casimir, what is this about?" "The Western delegation." "Answer the question." Lucian sighed, recognizing the tone that meant his king would not be moved. From what I understand, modern courtship is complicated. There are social media applications, messaging systems, though some still prefer face-to-face interaction. A written note would be considered rather old-fashioned, actually. Direct but personal. And if she gave such a note to the wrong man, then I imagine she would be mortified. Lucian moved closer, his expression shifting to something more serious. Casimir, you didn't meet with the museum curator tonight, did you? You didn't discuss the security arrangements for the Egyptian collection. No. Then what did you do? Casimir pulled the note from his pocket, holding it up to the lamplight. I found something more interesting than dead pharaohs. Lucian read the note over his shoulder, then immediately stepped back as if burned. No, absolutely not. You cannot be considering what I think you're considering. And what do you think I'm considering? Involving yourself with a human, a mortal. Casimir, you are the vampire king. You have responsibilities, political obligations, an entire kingdom that depends on your judgment. You cannot afford to be distracted by what? By feeling something for the first time in decades? Casimir turned to face his friend, his oldest companion, the vampire who had stood beside him through wars and plagues and centuries of darkness. When was the last time you felt truly alive, Lucian? When was the last time anything mattered beyond politics and power and endless negotiations? That is our existence. That is the price of immortality. Perhaps I'm tired of paying it. Lucian's expression hardened. This is madness. You don't even know this woman. She wrote that note for someone else, a human man named Marcus. She's not interested in you. She's not even aware you exist. Not yet. Even if you approached her, even if by some miracle she reciprocated your interest, what then? She's mortal. She'll age, she'll die, and you'll remain exactly as you are now. That's if the court doesn't tear her apart first. The old families will never accept a human in your life, let alone at your side. The old families don't dictate my choices. Don't they? Lucian's voice rose slightly. You think they'll accept you breaking every tradition, every custom we have? A vampire king with a human lover? It's forbidden for good reasons, Casimir. Humans are fragile. They die so easily. They can be used against us, leveraged as weaknesses, and when they inevitably discover what we truly are, they run in terror or they try to use us. There is no happy ending in this story. Casimir was quiet for a long moment, the note still in his hand. Everything Lucian said was true. He'd lived long enough to know the patterns, to understand why the laws existed. Vampires and humans didn't mix, not really. There were dalliances, brief affairs, but never anything lasting, never anything real. But that note, those words, the courage in them, the hope. I'm going to the fountain on Friday, he said finally. I'm going to meet her. This is a mistake. Perhaps, but it's my mistake to make. Lucian looked at him for a long moment, then shook his head. You're going to break her heart. Or worse, get her killed. I hope whatever you think you'll gain from this is worth that price. He left the study, his footsteps echoing through the mansion's halls. Casimir stood alone in the darkness, the note pressed against his palm, and wondered if his old friend was right. Probably, almost certainly. But he was going to the fountain anyway. The next 3 days passed with agonizing slowness, though Casimir filled them with the usual obligations. He met with the Western delegation and negotiated a compromise on blood distribution rights. He adjudicated a dispute between 2 vampire families over hunting territory in Brooklyn. He reviewed security protocols for the underground clubs where vampires and humans mingled, each unaware of the truth about the other. But through it all, his mind kept returning to Wren. He'd found her easily enough. Modern technology made tracking humans remarkably simple when you had the resources. Wren Novak, 26 years old, marketing coordinator at a mid-sized advertising firm in Midtown. She lived in a small apartment in Queens, took the subway to work, had a close friend named Riley, who she had lunch with twice a week. She was kind to strangers, donated to homeless people on the street corners, and stayed late at the office more often than she should. And she was in love with Marcus Teller, senior account manager at her firm, a man who, from what Casimir's people had discovered, barely knew she existed. He shouldn't have been investigating her. It was an invasion of privacy, a violation of the boundaries that should exist between his world and hers. But he couldn't seem to stop himself. The more he learned about her, the more fascinated he became. She wasn't extraordinary by conventional standards, not wealthy, not famous, not powerful. Just a normal young woman trying to make her way in an indifferent city. But she'd written that note. She'd been brave enough to risk rejection, to put her feelings into words and plan to hand them to the object of her affection. How many people, human or vampire, had that kind of courage? Friday arrived draped in autumn clouds, the sky threatening rain. Casimir dressed carefully that evening, choosing clothes that would help him blend with the human crowd. Dark jeans, a black button-down shirt, a leather jacket that hid the preternatural paleness of his skin. He tied his white hair back loosely, knowing he couldn't completely disguise his nature, but hoping the gathering dusk would help. Lucian cornered him in the entrance hall. "Last chance to reconsider." "I'm not reconsidering." "Then at least take security with you. If the other courts learn you're meeting with a human alone, I can protect myself and her." "That's what concerns me most." Lucian stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You're already thinking of her as yours to protect. Casimir, you've known of her existence for 3 days. 3 days, and already you're behaving like what? Like a vampire who's found his mate." The word hung in the air between them. Mate. The old term, rarely used anymore, for the bond that could form between vampires, or in the rarest cases, between a vampire and a human. A connection that transcended logic, that rewrote everything else in a vampire's existence. It was considered a myth by most modern vampires, a romantic notion from a more superstitious age. But Casimir's grandmother had been mated to his grandfather for 600 years before they'd finally met the sun together. He'd seen that bond with his own eyes, witnessed a love that had endured centuries. "That's impossible," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I haven't even spoken to her." "All the more reason to walk away now, before this becomes something you can't control." But Casimir was already walking toward the door, and they both knew he wouldn't stop. Central Park at sunset was crowded with joggers, tourists, and couples taking advantage of the cooling air. Casimir navigated through them with practiced ease, his senses extending outward, searching for that particular scent of orange blossom and vanilla. He found the Bethesda fountain surrounded by people, street musicians playing for coins, artists sketching the angel of the water statue. And there, sitting on the edge of the fountain's basin, was Wren. She wore a blue dress this time, simple and modest, with a cardigan against the evening chill. Her hair was down, falling in waves around her shoulders, and she clutched a small purse in her lap with white-knuckled fingers. She was early, he realized, had probably been here for 20 minutes already, working up her courage. Casimir stayed back, hidden among the crowd, watching her. She kept glancing around, checking her phone, smoothing down her dress. The anxiety rolled off her in waves that he could taste in the air. She was terrified, hopeful, vulnerable in a way that made something primal stir in his chest, the instinct to protect, to shield, to destroy anything that might hurt her. The minutes ticked past. Sunset came and went, the sky darkening from gold to purple to deep blue. Wren's phone showed 6 o'clock, 6:15, 6:30. Marcus wasn't coming. Casimir could see the exact moment she accepted it. Her shoulders slumped, her grip on her purse loosened, and she blinked rapidly against tears that threatened to fall. She sat there for another 5 minutes, as if giving the man one last chance, then slowly stood up. She'd taken 3 steps away from the fountain when Casimir moved into her path. She nearly walked into him, stopping short with a small gasp of surprise. "Oh, I'm so sorry, I wasn't." Her words died as she looked up at him. He watched her eyes widen, her pupils dilating. The scent of her heartbeat accelerated, blood rushing faster through her veins. Fear? Attraction? Both, perhaps. Humans always had an instinctive reaction to vampires, even when they didn't know what they were sensing. The predator recognition buried deep in their primate brains. "Are you all right?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle, non-threatening. She blinked, seeming to shake off whatever spell had caught her. "Yes, I'm fine. Just not paying attention to where I was going. Excuse me." She tried to move past him, but he stepped smoothly to the side, maintaining eye contact. "You seem upset." "I'm not. It's not..." She stopped. took a breath. It's nothing. Personal stuff. I should go. You were waiting for someone. It wasn't a question. Her cheeks flushed pink, visible even in the growing darkness. How did you? Were you watching me? That's kind of creepy. I apologize. I happened to notice you sitting alone for quite some time. I was concerned. She studied him with those hazel eyes, and Casimir felt the weight of her gaze like a physical touch. What did she see? A stranger, certainly. A man who probably looked dangerous despite his careful appearance. But there was curiosity in her expression too, warring with caution. Well, I'm fine, she said finally. Thank you for your concern, but I really need to go. He's a fool. What? The man who didn't show up. He's a fool. Ren's eyes glistened with unshed tears. You don't know anything about it. I know that someone who makes you wait by a fountain at sunset, who lets you sit there alone checking your phone every 30 seconds, who stands you up without even the courtesy of a text message, that person doesn't deserve your affection. He paused, letting his words sink in. I also know that writing down your feelings and having the courage to share them is a rare and precious thing. Most people never take that risk. She went very still. How do you know I wrote anything down? Too much. He'd revealed too much. Casimir reached into his jacket and pulled out the note, now slightly worn from being carried close to his chest for days. You dropped this at the museum Monday evening? Ren's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, you read that? You've had that this whole time? She reached for it, but he held it just out of reach. Did you give it to him, to Marcus? That's none of your business. Did you? No. The word burst out of her, raw and frustrated. No, I was going to give it to him this morning, but he was in meetings all day, and then I thought maybe it was better to just meet him here and tell him in person. So I sent him a text, asked him to meet me at the fountain. He said, okay. He said he'd be here. Her voice cracked, but obviously he forgot or didn't care enough to show up, or I don't know. I don't know why I thought this would work. I don't know why I thought someone like him would ever see someone like me. The pain in her voice was a knife between Casimir's ribs. He'd seen human suffering before, witnessed tragedies that would break most people's minds, but somehow this woman's heartbreak over an unremarkable human man affected him more deeply than centuries of death and war. Come with me, he said suddenly. What? No, I don't even know you. For all I know, you're a serial killer who preys on women with bad luck. My name is Casimir. I'm not a serial killer. And you're Ren Novak. You work in marketing. You take your coffee with too much cream and not enough sugar, and you deserve far better than someone who can't even appreciate the gift of your honesty. She stared at him, clearly torn between alarm and something else, intrigue, maybe. You really did your research, didn't you? That's actually disturbing. I prefer to call it thorough. Come with me, he said again, just for an hour. Let me buy you dinner, and I'll give you back your note. Let me prove that not all men are careless with precious things. This is insane. I should call the police. But you won't. Why shouldn't I? He held up the note, letting her see it clearly. Because you want this back. And because part of you is curious about what would happen if you said yes. Part of you wants to know why a strange man was so captivated by words meant for someone else that he's been carrying them around for days, hoping for a chance to meet the woman who wrote them. Ren bit her lip, warring with herself. He could see the logical part of her brain screaming warnings, listing all the reasons this was a terrible idea. But he could also see the hurt, the disappointment, the part of her that was tired of being careful and sensible and ignored. 1 hour, she said finally. A public place, and you give me back that note. Done. He took her to a small Italian restaurant in the village, one he knew was neutral territory, no vampire ownership, no connection to his world, just good food and a warm atmosphere. They sat in a corner booth, and Casimir ordered wine while Ren studied the menu with intense focus, clearly using it as a shield against the awkwardness of the situation. So, she said after the waiter left with their orders, Casimir, that's an unusual name. It's an old family name, Eastern European. And what do you do, Casimir, with the Eastern European name? Besides, read other people's notes and track down their personal information? He allowed himself a small smile. I manage property investments, real estate mostly. It's boring work, but it pays well. It wasn't entirely a lie. He did own significant property throughout the city, though managing his kingdom was significantly more complicated than property investment. And you just happened to be at the museum Monday evening? I had business there. You happened to run past me quite frantically. You dropped several items, but you only kept the note. The other items weren't as interesting. Wren took a long drink of her wine. This is the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me. You know that, right? This is objectively insane behavior on both our parts. Perhaps sometimes the most meaningful connections begin in unexpected ways. Did you just quote a fortune cookie at me? He laughed, surprising himself. I might have, I apologize. She smiled then, just a little, and the expression transformed her face. She was pretty when she was anxious, but when she smiled, she was radiant. Casimir felt something in his chest constrict. If he'd still had functioning lungs, he might have lost his breath. Their food arrived and conversation became easier. Wren told him about her work, her frustrations with office politics and creative compromises. She talked about growing up in Ohio, moving to New York for college and never leaving. She mentioned her parents with affection, her younger brother with exasperation, her dreams of someday working for a non-profit where her skills could make a real difference. Casimir found himself sharing more than he'd intended. He talked about growing up far from America, about the weight of family expectations, about the isolation that came with his particular kind of responsibility. He couldn't tell her the truth, of course, but he found ways to be honest within the constraints of his secret. You seem lonely, Wren said at one point, her eyes serious over her wine glass. I am. Often. But you must know lots of people, wealthy real estate investor, connections all over the city. Knowing people and being known are different things. I'm surrounded by people who want things from me, business deals, favors, access, but very few who see me as anything beyond what I can provide for them. Wren nodded slowly. I understand that. Not the wealthy investor part, obviously, but the feeling invisible thing. I've worked at my company for 3 years, and I don't think Marcus has ever once remembered my name without looking at my nameplate. Then he's not worth your affection. Maybe not. But feelings don't care about worth, do they? They just are. True enough. She tilted her head, studying him. Can I ask you something? And will you promise to answer honestly? I'll try. Why did you really keep that note? And why did you want to meet me? Casimir was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. Because I've lived a long time, and I've become very good at going through motions, fulfilling obligations, maintaining appearances. But when I read your note, I felt something I haven't felt in years, genuine emotion, curiosity, hope, the idea that someone could be brave enough to risk rejection for the possibility of connection. It reminded me of what matters, of what I've been missing. So I'm what? A novelty? A diversion? No, you're someone I wanted to know. Someone I still want to know if you'll let me. Wren looked down at her plate, pushing pasta around with her fork. This is crazy. You're practically a stranger. I came to that fountain to meet someone else. I shouldn't be here. But you are here. But I am here, she echoed softly. She looked up at him, and there was something vulnerable in her expression. I felt it too, when you stepped in front of me. Like something clicked into place just for a second. Like recognition, even though I've never seen you before in my life. Perhaps you have, in another time. Now you're just being dramatic. Perhaps. She smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. They finished dinner talking about smaller things, favorite books, movies, the best pizza places in the city. By the time Casimir paid the check, despite Wren's protests, it felt like they'd known each other far longer than 2 hours. Outside the restaurant, the night had grown cool and crisp. Wren pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, and Casimir fought the urge to offer his jacket. Too familiar, too presumptuous. Though walking her to the subway required every ounce of self-control he possessed, when what he really wanted was to carry her back to his mansion and never let her leave. The mate bond, Lucian had called it. Maybe a second in command had been right. Thank you, Wren said as they stopped at the top of the subway stairs. For dinner, for distracting me from my terrible evening, for being surprisingly not creepy despite the objectively creepy circumstances. You're welcome, though I'm disappointed to be merely not creepy. She laughed. Don't push your luck. She held out her hand. My note? He pulled it from his pocket but didn't immediately hand it over. Can I see you again? I don't know if that's a good idea. Why not? Because this feels intense in a way I don't understand. Because I just got rejected by someone else. Because you're clearly way out of my league, and I don't need another situation where I'm more invested than the other person. What if I'm already invested? You don't even know me. Then let me know you. Let me take you to dinner again, or a museum, or anywhere you want to go. No expectations, no pressure, just two people getting to know each other. Ren worried her bottom lip between her teeth. Why do I feel like if I say yes to you, my whole life is going to change? Perhaps because it will, perhaps because it should. That's not reassuring. I'm not trying to be reassuring. I'm trying to be honest. She held his gaze for a long moment, and Casimir felt like she was looking straight through him, seeing things he normally kept hidden. Then slowly, she pulled out her phone. Give me your number. I'll think about it. He recited his personal number, the one only Lucian and a handful of trusted vampires knew. She typed it in, then sent him a text so he'd have hers. I'm not promising anything, she said, but I'll think about it. That's all I ask. She took the note from his hand, their fingers brushing for just a moment. The contact sent electricity up his arm, and from the way her eyes widened, she'd felt it too. Then she turned and descended into the subway station, leaving Casimir standing alone on the street corner, watching until she disappeared from sight. His phone buzzed 30 minutes later while he was in the car heading uptown. A text from Ren. That was the strangest and somehow best evening I've had in months. I'd like to see you again, but I have one condition. He typed back immediately, anything. Tell me something true about you, something real, something that matters. Casimir stared at the screen, mind racing. He couldn't tell her what he was not yet, possibly not ever. But she'd asked for truth, and he found he desperately wanted to give it to her. I've spent centuries building walls around myself, he wrote, telling myself that keeping distance from others was strength, that emotional connection was weakness. Then I read your note, and those walls started crumbling. You scare me, Ren Novak. You make me want things I thought I'd forgotten how to want, and I can't tell if that terrifies me or thrills me. He hesitated, then added, probably both. Her response came quickly. Centuries? Dramatic much? Despite himself, he smiled. Perhaps will you have dinner with me again? Yes, but I picked the place this time, and you have to tell me more about these walls of yours. Deal. Over the next 2 weeks, Casimir saw Ren 6 times. Coffee on a Tuesday morning before her work, lunch in a park on Thursday, a long dinner on Saturday that stretched until midnight, just talking. A Sunday afternoon at the Botanical Gardens. Each meeting felt both natural and surreal, as if they were existing in a bubble separate from the rest of the world. She was brilliant and funny and kind in ways that continually surprised him. She noticed small things: the homeless man who needed bus fare, the tourist couple struggling with their map, the barista who looked exhausted. She moved through the world with an open heart, giving freely of her time and attention, and she asked questions. So many questions. About his childhood, his family, his dreams. Casimir found himself telling her stories he hadn't shared in decades, carefully edited to remove the vampiric details, but honest in their emotional truth. He talked about losing his parents young, about the weight of inheriting their legacy, about the loneliness of leadership. You sound like you're talking about being a king, not a real estate investor, Ren said one evening as they walked through Chelsea, their hands occasionally brushing together, but never quite holding. Perhaps I am, in a sense. We all rule over our own small kingdoms, don't we? That's very philosophical for someone who spends his days looking at property values, he smiled. I contain multitudes. Clearly. But for all the time they spent together, Casimir was always careful not to reveal too much, not to let her see his true nature. He met her only in the evening, citing work obligations during daylight hours. He never ate in front of her, claiming a sensitive stomach. He maintained an illusion of humanity that grew more exhausting with each passing day. The hardest part was the physical distance he had to maintain. Every instinct screamed at him to touch her, to pull her close, to claim her as his in every way that mattered. But he was terrified of losing control, of letting her feel the coldness of his skin or the absence of his heartbeat. So he kept space between them, even as that space felt like torture. Ren noticed, of course. She was too observant not to. "Why won't you touch me?" she asked one night as they stood outside her apartment building. They'd just finished dinner, and he'd walked her home as always. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean. We've been seeing each other for 2 weeks. We talk for hours. You look at me like—" She stopped, blushing. "Like I matter. But you never hold my hand. Never try to kiss me. You barely even stand close to me. If I didn't know better, I'd think you weren't attracted to me at all." "That's not—" He stopped, struggling for words. "That's absolutely not the case." "Then what is it?" "Because I feel like we have this connection, this thing between us, but you won't let it go anywhere, and I don't understand why." Casimir looked at her standing there in the streetlight, her hair lifting slightly in the breeze, her eyes full of confusion and hope and growing hurt. He was at a crossroads. He could tell her the truth and watch her run screaming, or he could continue lying and watch her pull away anyway, or he could— He closed the distance between them in one smooth step and kissed her. The moment their lips met, the world fell away. Ren made a small surprised sound that melted into something softer, more welcoming. Her hands came up to his chest, then slid around to his back, pulling him closer. She tasted like wine and chocolate and something uniquely her, and Casimir felt centuries of control threatening to snap. He forced himself to gentle, to be careful despite the hunger roaring through him. His hands cupped her face, his thumbs stroking her cheeks, and he poured everything he felt into that kiss, the longing, the fear, the desperate hope that somehow this could work. When they finally broke apart, Ren was breathing hard, her pupils dilated, her lips pink and swollen. "Okay," she said breathlessly. "Okay, so you are attracted to me." "Devastatingly so." "Then why have you been holding back?" "Because I'm terrified of hurting you, of moving too fast, of being too much for you to handle." She studied his face, her hand coming up to trace his jawline. "You're freezing," she said softly. "Your skin is like ice." He should have pulled away, should have made an excuse. Instead, he caught her hand and held it against his cheek. "I run cold. Always have." "That's not—" She paused, frowning slightly. "There's something you're not telling me. Something important." "Yes." "Will you tell me?" "Eventually. If you'll be patient with me." She was quiet for a long moment, her hand still pressed to his face. Then she nodded slowly. "I can be patient, but Casimir, whatever this secret is, it needs to not be something that will destroy me. I've been hurt before. I need to know that you're being careful with me for the right reasons. I would never hurt you intentionally. That's a promise." "Okay, I'll trust you. But that trust has limits." "I understand." She kissed him again, briefly, then stepped back toward her door. "Same time tomorrow?" "I'll be here." He watched her go inside, waiting until he saw her apartment light come on before turning away. His phone was already buzzing with messages from Lucien. Apparently his second-in-command had been trying to reach him all evening. Something about a situation with the Southern Territories, a challenger questioning his authority, demands for his immediate attention. Casimir ignored all of it and went home, Ren's taste still on his lips, her warmth still echoing against his skin. The confrontation came 3 days later. Casimir was in his study reviewing border agreements when Lucien entered without knocking, followed by 3 of the oldest vampires in the city, Nikolai, Serafina, and Dmitri, all of them over 500 years old, all of them influential in vampire politics. "We need to talk," Nikolai said without preamble. His white hair was pulled into a severe knot, his pale face set in harsh lines. "About your human." Casimir set down his paper slowly, carefully keeping his expression neutral. "I don't know what you're referring to." "Don't insult us with denials," Serafina said. She was beautiful in the terrible way of old vampires, her features too perfect to be quite human. "You've been seen with a mortal woman, multiple times, in public. You're creating a spectacle. I'm allowed to socialize with humans." "Not like this." Dmitri stepped forward, his ancient eyes hard. "We've heard the reports, the way you look at her, the way you guard her. You're bonding with her, Casimir. You're forming an attachment that violates every code we have. The codes are guidelines, not laws. They're there to protect us." Nikolai's voice rose. Humans are food, occasionally entertainment, but never equals, never mates. If the other courts hear that our king has taken a human lover, they'll see it as weakness. They'll challenge your authority. Some will view it as permission to break the taboos themselves. Perhaps the taboos are outdated. The three vampires exchanged glances, and Casimir could see the calculation in their eyes. This was worse than he'd thought. They weren't here to warn him, they were here to deliver an ultimatum. "The council has voted," Serafina said quietly. "If you continue this relationship, you'll force us to act. We cannot allow a human to have influence over our king. We cannot allow this precedent." "Are you threatening me?" "We're trying to save you from yourself," Dmitri said. "End it now, Casimir, before this goes any further, before someone gets hurt. And if I refuse, then the council will handle it for you." The words hung in the air like poison. Casimir rose slowly from his chair, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and absolutely lethal. "If any vampire under my rule touches one hair on Ren's head, I will consider it a declaration of war. Not against me, but against yourselves. Because I will burn your houses to the ground, I will destroy everything you've built, and I will make sure everyone knows you died because you couldn't respect your king's authority." Nikolai's face paled. "You would go to war over a human?" "Yes." "You've gone mad," Serafina whispered. "Perhaps, but she's mine, and I protect what's mine. That's not madness. That's nature. Our nature. And if you've forgotten that, then perhaps you've lived too long in human society and forgotten what it means to be a vampire." Dmitri stepped forward, his expression somewhere between anger and genuine concern. "We're trying to protect you, my king. This will end badly. Humans always discover the truth eventually, and when she learns what you are, she'll either run in terror or try to use you. And when she inevitably dies, because all humans die, Casimir, you'll be left with nothing but grief. Is that really worth destroying centuries of carefully maintained order?" "Get out." Casimir's voice was soft but absolute. "All of you, and spread the word among the court. Ren Novak is under my personal protection. Anyone who harms her answers to me directly." They left, but the worry on Lucian's face as he lingered in the doorway spoke volumes. "You're really doing this? You're choosing her over everything else?" "I'm not choosing her over anything. I'm simply refusing to let others dictate my life." "It amounts to the same thing." Lucian moved closer, his voice dropping. "Casimir, I've known you for 200 years. I've stood beside you through everything. But this path you're walking, it terrifies me. Because I know you, and I know that once you commit to something, you commit completely. And I don't think you've fully considered what that means in this case." "What does it mean?" "It means eventually you'll have to tell her the truth. And when you do, when she looks at you with fear instead of affection, when she realizes the monster you actually are, it will destroy you. And I don't know if you'll recover from that. Or perhaps she'll surprise us all. Humans don't surprise us. They react exactly as we expect them to react when confronted with predators. She's different. They're never different, Casimir. They're never different." But Lucian was wrong. Casimir knew it in his bones. Ren was different not because she was special or chosen or destined, but because she was genuine. She saw the world clearly, accepted its complications, and chose kindness anyway. That kind of strength was rarer than immortality. He just had to find the right way to tell her. The opportunity came sooner than expected, and in the worst possible way. It was a Friday night, and Casimir had taken Ren to a late showing at a revival cinema in the village. They'd watched an old black-and-white film, sitting close in the dark theater, Ren's head eventually resting on his shoulder. It had been perfect, simple and quiet, and exactly what he needed after days of political maneuvering and thinly veiled threats from his court. They were walking back to her apartment, taking the long route through quieter streets, when Casimir's senses suddenly screamed warning. Too late, he realized they weren't alone. 3 figures stepped out of an alley ahead of them, vampires, young ones by the scent, probably not more than 50 years old. Behind them, 2 more cut off their retreat. They were all dressed in dark clothes, their pale faces hungry, their eyes fixed on Ren. "Well, well," one of them said, a tall male with a shaved head. "The king out for a stroll with his pet." Casimir stepped in front of Ren immediately, putting his body between her and the threat. "This doesn't concern you. Leave now and I'll forget this happened." "But it does concern us," a female vampire said, moving closer. "The whole court is talking about it. Our king, infatuated with a human. Some of us think that's fascinating. We'd like to see what makes her so special." "Final warning. Leave." "What's happening?" Ren's voice came from behind him, tight with fear. "Casimir, who are these people?" "Just some acquaintances. Everything is fine." But everything was not fine. He could see the calculation in the vampire's eyes, the way they were positioning themselves for an attack. They'd come here deliberately, had probably been watching him for days, waiting for an opportunity. Whether they planned to hurt Ren or simply scare her, he didn't know, but he couldn't let them get close enough to find out. "Last chance," he said quietly, and let his power unfurl just slightly enough for them to feel the weight of it, the centuries of strength behind it. "Walk away." The bald vampire smiled, showing fangs. "Make us, my king." They attacked in unison, moving with vampiric speed. Casimir met them head-on, moving so fast he was nearly a blur. He caught the first one by the throat and threw him into a brick wall, hard enough to crack both the vampire's skull and the masonry. The second one he backhanded across the face with enough force to snap her head around. The third tried to dart around him toward Ren, but Casimir grabbed him mid-leap and slammed him into the pavement. The whole thing took less than 5 seconds. The two vampires who'd been blocking the retreat saw their companions broken and bleeding and made the smart choice. They ran, disappearing into the darkness with supernatural speed. The three on the ground groaned and slowly began pulling themselves together, their injuries already starting to heal. Casimir turned to face Ren, his heart sinking. She'd backed up against a building, her hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. He must look monstrous to her now, his eyes probably glowing with power, his fangs partially extended from the rush of violence, his face an inhuman mask of rage. "Ren," he started, but she flinched away from his outstretched hand. What was that? What are you?" Her voice was shaking. "You moved so fast. You threw that man like he weighed nothing, and your eyes are glowing." "Please, let me explain." "Explain what? That you're what, some kind of superhuman? Some kind of—" She stopped, her gaze falling to the bald vampire who was trying to crawl away. Even in the dim streetlight, she could see his fangs, the unnatural paleness of his skin, the way his broken arm was already straightening itself. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not possible. Vampires aren't real. They're not real." "Ren." "Stay away from me." She pressed herself flatter against the wall, tears streaming down her face. "You're one of them. You're one of those things. All this time I've been, oh God, were you planning to kill me? Drink my blood? Was this all just you playing with your food?" Each word was a knife to his chest. "No, never. I would never hurt you." "You're a monster." "Yes," he said simply, quietly. "I am. But I'm also the man who spent every day for the past 3 weeks falling in love with you. Both things are true." She stared at him, tears still falling, her whole body trembling. "This isn't real. This can't be real." "I know this is a shock. I know you're terrified. But please, Ren, please let me explain. Let me take you somewhere safe and tell you everything." "Somewhere safe? You're a vampire. There is no safe with you." One of the fallen vampires started laughing, a wet, pained sound. "See, my king, humans always react the same way. Fear and revulsion. It's their nature." Casimir wheeled on him, and something in his expression made the vampire's laughter die instantly. "If you value your immortal life, you'll crawl away now and never speak of this night again." The 3 vampires scrambled to their feet and fled, leaving Casimir alone with Ren on the empty street. He turned back to her, keeping his distance, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to force you to come with me. But please, before you run, before you write me off as a monster and nothing more, remember the last 3 weeks. Remember every conversation we've had. Remember that I told you I run cold, that I only meet you in the evening, that I've been holding back because I was terrified of this exact moment. Does any of that seem like the behavior of a monster who sees you as food?" Ren was crying harder now, confused and scared and overwhelmed. I don't know anything anymore. You lied to me. I omitted the truth because I knew you'd react exactly like this. Because telling someone you're a vampire is not first date conversation. Because I was hoping, his voice broke slightly. I was hoping that by the time you found out, you'd know me well enough to see past what I am to who I am. I need to go. I need to go home and think. Let me walk you, please. The city isn't safe tonight, especially not with rogue vampires around who know you're important to me. You're asking me to trust you. You're asking me to feel safe with a vampire. I'm asking you to trust the man you've gotten to know. The part that's vampire is just biology. The part that cares about you, that wants to protect you, that lies awake in the day thinking about your smile, that's the real part. That's the part that matters. She looked at him for a long moment, clearly warring with herself. Then, slowly, shakily, she nodded. You can walk me home, but you're staying on the other side of the sidewalk. And if you try anything, I won't. They walked in silence, Casimir maintaining the distance she'd requested, even though every instinct screamed at him to stay close, to guard her, to eliminate any possible threat. Wren kept her arms wrapped around herself, her head down, not looking at him. When they reached her building, she stopped at the door and finally turned to face him. I need time. I need to process this. I understand. Do you, though? Do you understand that my entire worldview just shattered? That everything I thought I knew about reality is apparently wrong? That the man I was falling for is actually a vampire who's probably centuries old and has killed who knows how many people? 437 years old, he said quietly. And yes, I've killed. In wars, in self-defense to protect others. I've done terrible things in my long life. Wren. But I've also tried to do good. I've protected humans from vampires who would prey on them indiscriminately. I've maintained laws and order in a world that exists in the shadows of yours. I'm not asking you to think I'm perfect or innocent. I'm just asking you not to reduce me to one-word monster. She wiped her eyes. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm strong enough to be with someone who isn't even human. You're the strongest person I've ever met, human or vampire. But if you decide you can't handle this, if you want me to walk away and never contact you again, I'll respect that decision. I won't stalk you or manipulate you or use vampire powers to make you forget. You'll be free. Free, she repeated hollowly. I don't feel free. I feel like my world just became 100 times more complicated and dangerous. It has. I'm sorry for that. I would spare you this if I could. Wren looked at him, really looked at him, and he let her see everything, the guilt, the fear, the love. Don't contact me, she said finally. Not for a while. I need space to think, to figure out if I can live with this knowledge. If I decide I can, I'll reach out. If I don't, then I'll know, and I'll stay away. She nodded, then disappeared into her building without another word. Casimir stood on the sidewalk for a long time after she was gone, feeling hollow in a way he hadn't experienced in centuries. When he finally returned home, Lucian was waiting. One look at Casimir's face told him everything he needed to know. She knows, yes, and she's terrified of me. She thinks I'm a monster. You are a monster. We all are. That's the problem with letting humans see the truth. They can't reconcile the person they thought they knew with the reality of what we are. Casimir sank into a chair, suddenly feeling every one of his 437 years. Maybe you were right. Maybe this was always doomed to fail. I'm sorry, old friend, truly. The worst part is that I can't even be angry with her. She's right to be afraid. I am dangerous. I have killed. I am a predator who's been courting prey. What kind of monster does that make me? The kind who fell in love, Lucian said quietly. There's no shame in that. But perhaps now you can focus back on your kingdom, on the politics and responsibilities you've been neglecting. But Casimir couldn't focus. Days passed, then a week, then 2, and there was no word from Wren. He monitored her from a distance, making sure she got to work safely, that no vampires approached her, that her life continued as normally as possible. He'd assigned protection to her without her knowledge, 2 of his most trusted guards watching her around the clock. The court sensed his distraction and began pushing boundaries. There were disputes he should have handled personally that he delegated to Lucian, meetings he canceled, decisions he deferred. His kingdom began to show cracks, small but visible. "You need to snap out of this," Lucian told him after a particularly disastrous negotiation with the Boston Territory. "You're still king whether she wants you or not. You have responsibilities." "I know." "Then act like it." But Casimir couldn't seem to care. What was the point of being king, of having power and immortality and everything he'd built, if he had to spend eternity without the one person who'd made him feel alive again? He was in his study 3 weeks after that terrible night when his phone finally buzzed with a message from Wren. "Can we talk? I'm ready to talk." His hands actually shook as he typed back, "When and where? Your place? Tonight? I want to see where you really live, what you really are." He sent her the address, then spent the next 3 hours in a panic preparing the mansion. He had the staff clear out, wanting no other vampires present. He dimmed the lights to something less harsh, set out wine and food in case she wanted it, paced the halls like a caged animal. When the doorbell rang, he forced himself to walk slowly to answer it, to not appear too eager or too desperate, even though he was absolutely both. Wren stood on his doorstep wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair in a ponytail, her expression guarded but determined. "Hi. Hi. Please come in." She stepped into the entrance hall and looked around, taking in the Gothic architecture, the antique furniture, the paintings that were centuries old. "This is not a real estate investor's house. No, it's a vampire king's mansion." She turned to stare at him. "You're a king? An actual king?" "Yes. I rule over all the vampires in the Eastern Americas. Have for over 200 years. "Of course you are," she said faintly, "because finding out the man I'm falling for is a vampire wasn't dramatic enough. He also has to be royalty." "Would it help if I said it's a lot of tedious politics and paperwork?" "Not really." But there was the faintest hint of humor in her voice, and Casimir felt hope flicker in his chest. She followed him to his study, where he'd arranged the wine and food. She took a glass but didn't drink, just held it like a shield. "I've been doing research," she said, "since that night, reading everything I could find about vampires, cross-referencing myths and legends, trying to separate fiction from fact. And apparently most vampire fiction is either completely wrong or sort of right. You do drink blood? Yes. Human blood? Sometimes. I also drink animal blood, and there are synthetic alternatives now. But yes, human blood is necessary for optimal health." She swallowed hard. "Have you ever killed anyone by drinking from them?" "Yes, in the past. Never innocent people, but yes, I've killed." "Do you plan to drink from me?" "No, not unless you wanted me to, which I doubt. And even then I'd be very careful. There are ways to feed without harming." "This is surreal." She set down her wine and wrapped her arms around herself. "I spent 3 weeks trying to convince myself you were a monster, that what we had was fake, that you were just manipulating me. But I couldn't make myself believe it, because every conversation we had, every moment we spent together felt real, more real than anything else in my life. It was real. It is real. How do I know that, though? How do I know you didn't use vampire mind control or hypnosis or whatever to make me feel this way? Because those things don't exist. We're stronger and faster than humans. We live forever. We drink blood. But we can't control minds or turn into bats or any of the Hollywood nonsense. We're just a different species trying to survive in a world that would destroy us if they knew we existed." "That's supposed to be reassuring?" "I'm not trying to be reassuring. I'm trying to be honest." He moved closer, careful not to crowd her. "Wren, I can't prove to you that your feelings are your own. I can only tell you that I've never once tried to manipulate or coerce you. Every choice you've made, every time you agreed to see me, that was entirely your decision. And if you decide right now that you want nothing to do with me, I'll respect that too." She looked up at him, her hazel eyes searching his face. "What do you want from me, Casimir?" "Really? Everything. Nothing. Whatever you're willing to give." He took a breath he didn't need. "I want to keep getting to know you. I want to have dinner with you and argue about movies and hear about your terrible coworkers. I want to protect you and make you laugh and watch you grow old while I stay exactly as I am. I want," his voice broke, "I want to love you for as long as you'll let me. even though I know that's selfish and unfair and will probably end in heartbreak. I'll grow old, I'll die. Yes? And you'll live on forever. Yes. That's not fair. That's not fair to either of us. No, it's not. But life rarely is. Wren was quiet for a long time, staring down at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. I'm terrified. I'm terrified of loving someone who could accidentally kill me. I'm terrified of the vampire world you live in, the politics and danger you've hinted at. I'm terrified that I'm not strong enough for this, that I'll break under the weight of it all. I'm terrified too, Casimir admitted. I'm terrified of losing you. I'm terrified of my world destroying you. I'm terrified that I'm being selfish by wanting this when I should let you go and find a normal human life. Then why don't you let me go? Because for 400 years I've been going through motions, existing but not living. And then you crashed into my life with your brave, foolish note and your honest heart, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to want something beyond duty and power. You make me feel human, Wren. You make me remember what I loved about humanity before I became this. She looked up at him, tears glistening in her eyes. I'm still in love with you. Even knowing what you are, even being terrified, I'm still in love with you. And I hate it because it would be so much easier if I could just walk away. Then walk away. I won't stop you. I can't. I've tried. I've spent 3 weeks trying to talk myself out of this, and I can't do it. You're in my head, in my heart, and I don't know how to get you out. Casimir closed the distance between them, giving her plenty of time to move away if she wanted. When she didn't, he cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the supernatural strength behind it. Then don't. Stay with me. Let me prove to you that this can work. How? How can this possibly work? I don't know, but we'll figure it out together. She laughed, the sound watery and slightly desperate. You're asking me to trust you with my life, literally. I know. I'm asking for everything and offering uncertainty in return. It's a terrible bargain. The worst. But I think I'm going to say yes anyway, because apparently I'm an idiot who falls for ancient vampire kings with trust issues and cold hands. He smiled, really smiled, for the first time in weeks. I prefer romantically courageous. That's a very generous interpretation. I contain multitudes. She rolled her eyes, but she was smiling too. Then she pulled his head down and kissed him, and it felt like coming home. Like the missing piece clicking into place. Like everything terrible and complicated and dangerous was worth it for this one perfect moment. When they broke apart, Wren pressed her forehead to his. I have conditions, a lot of conditions. Name them. First, you have to tell me everything. No more secrets, no more hidden vampire world stuff. If I'm going to be part of your life, I need to actually know what that life is. Agreed. Second, you introduce me to your people, your court or council or whatever you call them. I'm not going to be some secret you keep hidden away. If this is real, then I want to meet the people who are important to you. That might be dangerous. Some of them already view you as a threat, which is why I need to meet them. I need to show them I'm not a threat, just someone who cares about you. He hesitated, then nodded. It's risky, but you're right. If this is going to work long term, the court needs to accept you. Third, we go slow. I need time to adjust to all of this, to process what it means to be with someone who isn't human. And you need to be patient with me when I freak out or ask stupid questions or have moments where I'm terrified of you. I can do that. And fourth, she paused, biting her lip. Fourth, you have to promise me that if this becomes too dangerous, if your world starts putting me in real danger, you'll let me go. You won't let me die or turn into a vampire just because we're in love. You'll put my safety above your feelings. That one was harder. Casimir wanted to promise he'd protect her no matter what, that he'd never let her go. But she deserved honesty. I promise I'll always prioritize your safety. But I won't promise to let you go easily. If we reach a point where you're in danger because of me, I'll do everything in my power to eliminate that danger while keeping you in my life. That's not what I asked for. It's what I can offer. I won't lie to you, Wren. I'm selfish when it comes to you. I'll fight heaven and hell to keep you safe and with me. but I will never force you to stay if you truly want to leave." She studied his face for a long moment, then sighed. "I guess that's the best I'm going to get from a vampire king with possessive tendencies." "Probably. Then I accept your terms, all of them." They sealed the agreement with another kiss, this one deeper, more urgent. Casimir's control wavered as Wren's hand slid into his hair as she pressed herself against him, as her heartbeat accelerated with desire instead of fear. It would be so easy to lose himself in her, to let the vampire take over and claim her completely. But he'd made promises, and he intended to keep them. He pulled back slightly, resting his forehead against hers. "We should probably talk more before we move to other activities." "Probably," she agreed breathlessly, "but I've had 3 weeks of talking to myself. I'm a little tired of words right now." "Wren, I'm not asking you to turn me into a vampire or make some eternal commitment. I'm just asking you to hold me, to let me feel close to you. Can you do that without it being complicated?" He could. Just barely, with every ounce of control he possessed. But he could. He lifted her into his arms, earning a surprised squeak, and carried her to the leather couch in the corner of the study. He settled there with her curled against his chest, his arms around her, her head tucked under his chin. "You're still cold," she murmured. "I'll always be cold. Part of the vampire package. I guess I'll have to get used to it." They sat like that for a long time, not talking, just existing together. Casimir traced patterns on her back while Wren's breathing gradually slowed and steadied. He thought she might have dozed off when she spoke again, her voice quiet. "Tell me something. Something from before you were a vampire. Something human." He was quiet for a moment, reaching back through centuries of memories. "When I was 16, I fell in love with a girl from a neighboring village. She had dark hair and laughed at all my terrible jokes. I used to sneak out at night to meet her by a river, and we'd talk until dawn about all the places we'd go and things we'd see when we were older. What happened to her? She married someone else, someone more suitable from a better family. I was heartbroken for about 6 months until I met someone new and forgot all about her. Typical teenage drama. And then you became a vampire. And then I became a vampire. And I never got to experience any of those normal human milestones: marriage, children, growing old with someone. I traded all of that for immortality and power. Do you regret it? Sometimes. Often. Actually. Immortality sounds romantic until you've lived through it, until you've watched everyone you love age and die while you remain frozen in time. It's lonely." Wren shifted to look up at him. "Is that why you wanted to meet me? Because I reminded you of being human?" "Partly. But mostly because you were brave enough to write that note. Because in a world of people playing games and hiding their feelings, you were honest and direct and willing to risk rejection. That kind of courage is rare. It made me want to know you, even though the note was for someone else. Especially because it was for someone else. It meant you weren't trying to manipulate me or use me for my position. Your feelings were pure, uncomplicated by vampire politics or power games. You were just a woman with a crush, brave enough to act on it. Marcus texted me, a few days after the fountain incident." Casimir felt his jaw tighten. "Oh?" "He apologized for missing our meeting. Said he got caught up with work and forgot. Asked if I wanted to reschedule." She laughed softly. "I told him I'd met someone else." "How did he respond?" "He said, 'Cool, good for you,' and that was it. Not even disappointed. I spent months crushing on someone who could not have cared less about me. His loss is my gain. That's cheesy, but true." She smiled and settled back against his chest. "So what happens now? What's the vampire equivalent of dating?" "I suppose we do what we've been doing. Spend time together, learn about each other, navigate the complications as they arise." "And your court? When do I meet them?" "Soon. I'll arrange something. Though I should warn you, they're not going to be welcoming. Vampires are territorial and traditional. A human in the king's life is unprecedented." "Great. So I'll be walking into a room full of ancient, powerful vampires who all hate me on principle. That's not terrifying at all. I'll be with you. I won't let anyone hurt you." "Can you promise that? Can you really protect me from an entire court of vampires?" "Yes. I'm their king. My word is law. And I've already made it clear that you're under my protection. Anyone who touches you dies. It's that simple." She shivered slightly. "The casual way you talk about killing is kind of disturbing." "I'm sorry. I forget sometimes how different our worlds are." "I'll get used to it. Probably. Maybe." She yawned. "What time is it?" "Nearly 3 in the morning. I should go home. I have work tomorrow." But she made no move to get up, and Casimir tightened his arms around her slightly. "Stay. Call in sick. Spend the day here with me." "Tempting. But I can't just skip work because my vampire boyfriend wants to cuddle." "Vampire boyfriend," he repeated. "I like the sound of that. Don't get too excited. We're still figuring this out." But she was smiling, and when she finally did get up to leave, she kissed him with enough heat to make his centuries of control waver. He walked her to a car he'd called. No way was he letting her take the subway at this hour, and watched until the taillights disappeared around a corner. Lucian appeared from the shadows. "So she's staying?" "She's staying. The court won't like it. The court will accept it or deal with the consequences." "You're really willing to go to war over her?" Casimir looked at his oldest friend, his expression serious. "I would burn the world for her, Lucian. The sooner everyone understands that, the better." The next 2 weeks were the happiest Casimir could remember in decades. He and Ren fell into a routine dinners several times a week, long conversations late into the night, stolen kisses in dark corners of the city. She asked endless questions about vampire life, and he answered as honestly as he could. She told him about her human world, and he listened like every detail was precious. She still had moments of fear, times when his supernatural strength or speed reminded her what he was, and she'd go quiet and withdrawn. But she always came back, always chose to trust him again. Her courage amazed him. He also began introducing her to aspects of his world. He showed her the underground clubs where vampires and humans mingled, though he made sure she was never alone in them. He took her to the old church he'd converted into a library, filled with books and manuscripts spanning centuries. He even showed her the tunnels beneath the city, the network of passages vampires used to travel unseen. "It's like a whole other world under the regular world," Ren said as they walked through a particularly beautiful section where someone had painted murals on the walls. "How many humans know about this?" "Almost none. We're very careful about maintaining secrecy. And if someone does find out, someone who shouldn't know, we have ways of handling it. Sometimes memory alteration, sometimes relocation, sometimes—" He stopped. "Sometimes you kill them." "Yes, if they pose too great a threat." She was quiet for a moment. "Have you ever killed someone just for knowing about vampires?" "No, but I've ordered others to do it when the situation demanded it. I won't lie to you about that, Ren. Part of ruling means making hard decisions, sometimes terrible decisions. I don't know how you live with that. Neither do I sometimes. But someone has to maintain order. Someone has to protect both our worlds, and that burden fell to me." She took his hand she'd gotten over her discomfort with his cold skin and squeezed. "I don't think I could do what you do, make those choices. I hope you never have to." The meeting with the court was scheduled for the following Friday. Casimir spent the intervening days preparing Ren, explaining vampire etiquette, describing the key players she'd meet. He also called a formal gathering, making it clear that anyone who attended was expected to treat Ren with respect. The night of the meeting, he helped her dress in his mansion, lending her a dress from his collection, a simple but elegant black gown that made her look like she belonged in his world. She was nervous, her hands shaking as she tried to clasp a necklace. "Let me," Casimir said, taking the necklace and fastening it around her throat. "You look beautiful." "I look terrified." "That too. But mostly beautiful." She turned to face him. "What if they hate me? What if they try to hurt me?" "They won't. I'll be right beside you the entire time. And Ren, if at any point you feel unsafe or uncomfortable, we leave. No questions, no explanations. You're more important than vampire politics." She took a deep breath. "Okay, I can do this." The meeting was held in the mansion's grand ballroom, a space Casimir rarely used. When they entered, dozens of vampires were already present, all the major houses, all the influential families. They stood in clusters, their pale faces turning to stare as Casimir walked in with Ren on his arm. The silence was deafening. Casimir guided Ren to the head of the room, where two chairs had been set up, one clearly the king's throne, the other simpler, but positioned beside it. He seated her in the second chair, a deliberate message to the court. She was under his protection, at his side. "Thank you all for coming," Casimir said, his voice carrying easily through the chamber. "I've called this gathering to formally introduce Ren Novak. She's a human, yes, but she's also someone important to me. She's under my protection, and I expect all of you to treat her accordingly." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Nikolai stepped forward, his expression severe. "My king, with respect, this is highly irregular. Humans are not brought into our world like this. They're not paraded before the court. Ren is not being paraded. She's being acknowledged. There's a difference." "But why?" Serafina moved forward to stand beside Nikolai. "What purpose does she serve? Why risk exposing our world to a human?" "Because she matters to me. That should be reason enough." "It's not," Dmitri said, joining the others. "You're asking us to accept something that violates every tradition we have. You're asking us to trust a human with our secrets, our identities, our lives. What happens when she decides to expose us? What happens when she sells our secrets to the highest bidder or writes a book about the vampire king she seduced?" Ren's hand tightened on the arm of her chair, but she didn't speak. Casimir had warned her that this would happen, that the vampires would try to provoke her. "Ren would never do that," Casimir said firmly. "I trust her completely." "Based on what? A few weeks of courtship?" "My king, you're being blinded by infatuation. This human has a name," Ren said suddenly, her voice clear despite the tremor in it. "My name is Ren, and while I appreciate that this is strange for all of you, I'm not actually here to threaten or expose anyone. I'm here because I care about Casimir, and he thought it was important that I meet the people in his life." Every vampire in the room turned to stare at her. The weight of their attention was crushing, but Ren sat up straighter, meeting their gazes. "I know you don't trust me," she continued. "I wouldn't trust me either in your position. But I'm not stupid enough to think I could expose vampires without consequences. I'm also not interested in fame or money or whatever else you think I might want. I just want—" She glanced at Casimir. "I just want the chance to be with someone who makes me happy, even if that someone happens to be an ancient vampire king with a complicated political situation." A few vampires actually smiled at that. Casimir reached over and took her hand, a show of solidarity that sent another ripple of murmurs through the crowd. "I know change is difficult," he said, addressing the court. "I know this situation is unprecedented, but the world is changing, and we have to change with it. We can't hide in the shadows forever, pretending humans are nothing more than food and entertainment. Some of them—" He looked at Ren. "Some of them are so much more." "Pretty words," Nikolai said coldly. "But what happens when she dies? What happens when her fragile mortal life ends in 50 or 60 years and you're left grieving? Will you be able to rule effectively then? Will you be able to make rational decisions?" "I don't know," Casimir admitted, "but that's decades away, and I'd rather have 50 years with someone I love than 500 years alone." The court was silent for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, an older vampire stepped forward. Celestine, one of the ancient ones who rarely attended gatherings. She was over 700 years old, her white hair flowing down her back like silk, her pale face beautiful and terrible. "I remember when humans were not prey but partners," she said, her voice soft but carrying. "I remember when vampires and humans lived in uneasy but genuine cooperation. We've spent centuries telling ourselves that those days were foolish, that we're superior to humans in every way. But perhaps we've been wrong." She looked at Ren. "You're brave to come here, little human. Braver than most vampires would be in your position. I think perhaps our king has chosen well." It wasn't a ringing endorsement, but it was something. Casimir saw other vampires nodding slowly, considering. The tide was turning, if only slightly. "I propose a compromise," Celestine continued. "Let the human prove herself. Give her 1 year in that time. If she betrays our secrets or causes harm to our kind, the king's protection is forfeit. But if she proves trustworthy, if she shows herself to be worthy of his affection, then the court accepts her." Casimir wanted to reject it immediately, the idea of Ren having to prove herself, of her being on trial, but he felt her squeeze his hand slightly, a signal to wait. I accept those terms, Ren said. 1 year to prove I can be trusted. That's fair. Ren, Casimir started. It's okay. They need assurance, and I can give them that. She stood up, and Casimir rose with her. Thank you all for hearing me out. I know this isn't easy for any of you, but I promise I'll do my best to honor the trust you're placing in me. The meeting dispersed shortly after, vampires leaving in small groups, their expressions thoughtful. When the ballroom was finally empty, except for Casimir, Ren, and Lucian, Ren's legs gave out. Casimir caught her before she fell, lifting her into his arms. You were incredible. I was terrified. I thought they were going to kill me. Some of them considered it. That's not comforting. But Celestine's intervention changed things. She's respected, ancient. If she's willing to give you a chance, others will follow her lead. Lucian approached them, his expression unreadable. You did well, Miss Novak. Better than I expected. Thanks, I think. It was a compliment. Few humans could stand before a vampire court without breaking. I had good motivation. Ren looked up at Casimir. Can we go somewhere less vampire politics, I need about a gallon of wine and some terrible TV. He laughed and carried her to his private chambers, where they spent the rest of the night doing exactly that, drinking wine, watching reality shows, pretending for a few hours that they were just a normal couple without ancient courts and death sentences hanging over them. The next several months were a delicate balancing act. Ren continued her normal life work, friends, family, while also being gradually pulled into Casimir's world. She attended court functions, learned vampire history, even started studying some of the old languages they spoke. The vampires remained wary, but most were at least civil. There were difficulties, of course. Ren's friend Riley kept asking pointed questions about her mysterious new boyfriend who never came around during the day. Her parents wanted to meet him, which required elaborate scheduling. And there were still vampires who saw her as a threat, who made it clear they were watching, waiting for her to make a mistake. But there were beautiful moments, too. Casimir took her traveling to Paris, to Rome, to all the places he'd lived over his centuries. He showed her his old home in the Carpathian Mountains, now a ruin, but still achingly familiar. She met more of his people, the vampires who were loyal to him, and slowly won some of them over with her kindness and genuine curiosity. And their relationship deepened. The physical aspect finally progressed beyond kissing, though Casimir remained careful, always aware of his strength, always conscious that one moment of lost control could hurt her. But Ren was patient with him, helped him learn how to be gentle, and gradually they figured out how to navigate that aspect of their relationship. They talked about the future too, though those conversations were complicated. Ren would age while Casimir remained frozen. Eventually, she'd die, leaving him alone again. They could delay it. Vampire blood, carefully administered, could extend human life significantly. But it couldn't make her immortal without turning her fully, and that was a choice Casimir refused to make for her. I don't want to be a vampire, Ren said one night as they lay together in his bed, her head on his chest. I know that probably seems strange to you, turning down immortality, but I like being human. I like that my life has a natural arc, an ending. It makes things matter more. I understand, and I'd never pressure you to change, but you'll have to watch me grow old and die. Yes, and it will destroy me, but it will also have been worth it, every moment. She tilted her head to look at him. How can you be so sure? Because for 400 years, I forgot what it was to feel. You reminded me. Even if I only get 50 years with you, that's 50 years of being alive instead of just existing. That's enough. It doesn't feel like enough. No, but it's what we have, and I intend to treasure every moment of it. The 1-year mark approached faster than either of them expected. The court scheduled a final gathering where they would formally vote on whether to accept Ren. Casimir was confident she'd proven herself repeatedly, had won over most of the skeptics, had shown nothing but loyalty. But 3 days before the gathering, everything went wrong. Casimir was meeting with territorial representatives when Lucian burst into the chamber, his face ashen. We have a situation. Ren's been taken. Everything in Casimir went cold and still. What? She was leaving work. 4 vampires grabbed her, threw her in a van. They're rogue, not part of any territory we recognize. My sources say they're planning to use her as leverage against you. Where? We don't know yet. They've gone to ground. Casimir was moving before Lucian finished speaking, his power unfurling like a storm. Every vampire in the building flinched at the wave of raw fury rolling off their king. Find them. Use every resource we have. Call in every favor. I want her location in the next hour. Casimir, we're doing everything. Not enough. His voice cracked like thunder. She's been taken because of me, because she was brave enough to be with me, and you're telling me we can't find her? We will find her, but you need to stay calm. If you go in angry, you'll make mistakes. I'm past calm, Lucian. I'm past rational. They took what's mine, and I'm going to paint the streets with their blood. It took 90 minutes to find her. 90 minutes of Casimir pacing like a caged animal, his control hanging by a thread while his people scoured the city. When they finally got a location, an abandoned warehouse in Brooklyn, he didn't wait for backup. He simply vanished into the night, moving faster than any vampire in his territory. He reached the warehouse to find it guarded by a dozen vampires, all armed. They died quickly, efficiently, brutally. Casimir didn't bother with mercy or questions. He simply tore through them like a hurricane, following the scent of Ren's fear deeper into the building. He found her in a back room, tied to a chair, her face pale but her eyes fierce. The 4 vampires who'd taken her were standing around arguing about their next move. They looked up when Casimir entered, and one of them actually smiled. The king arrives. Perfect timing. We were just discussing our demands. Casimir removed his head from his shoulders before he finished speaking. The other 3 reacted instantly, moving to attack. They were fast, trained, dangerous. It didn't matter. Casimir fought like something unleashed from hell, all the carefully maintained control gone. He felt bones break under his hands, heard screams cut short, smelled blood in the air. When it was over, when all 4 vampires were dead or dying on the floor, Casimir turned to Ren. She was staring at him with wide eyes, clearly shocked by the violence she'd just witnessed. He probably looked like a monster covered in blood, his eyes glowing with power, his expression feral. "Are you hurt?" His voice came out rougher than usual. "I'm okay. Scared, but okay." "Casimir." He crossed to her in 2 strides, breaking her bonds with his bare hands, gathering her against his chest. She was shaking, adrenaline and fear making her tremble. He held her carefully despite the rage still singing through his veins. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. You were taken because of me. Not your fault, crazy rogue vampire's fault. I should have protected you better. I should have—" "Casimir, stop. You saved me. You came for me." She pulled back to look at his face, her hands coming up to frame his jaw. "You came for me. Always. I'll always come for you." She kissed him then, fierce and desperate, and he kissed her back with everything he had. When they finally broke apart, Lucian was there with backup, securing the scene, dealing with the bodies. He took one look at Casimir and Ren and simply nodded. "Get her out of here. We'll handle the cleanup." Casimir carried Ren out of the warehouse, into the night, away from the death and violence. She clung to him silently, her face buried in his neck, and he held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Because she was. The aftermath of the kidnapping sent ripples through the vampire world. Casimir tracked down everyone connected to the rogues, their suppliers, their contacts, anyone who'd known about the plan and not reported it. The purge was brutal and public, a clear message. Touching what belonged to the Vampire King had consequences. The court gathering happened as scheduled, but the mood was different now. The vampires had seen how far their king would go to protect his human. They'd witnessed the destruction he'd unleashed. And Ren herself had faced danger because of her connection to their world, had survived it with courage. The vote was unanimous. The court accepted her. Afterward, when everyone had left and it was just Casimir and Ren in the empty ballroom, she turned to him. "So that's it? I'm officially accepted?" "You're officially accepted. Does that mean I get a fancy title? Lady of the Vampires or something?" He smiled. "If you want one." "Nah, I'm good with just being Ren." She took his hand. "So what now?" "Now we live. However much time we have, we live." "That's vague. I'm working on being more spontaneous and less controlling." "How's that going?" "Terribly." She laughed, and the sound filled the empty ballroom with warmth. They left the mansion hand in hand, walking out into the New York night, two beings from different worlds who'd found each other against all odds. Years passed. Wren and Casimir built a life together that straddled both their worlds. She kept her job, her friends, her humanity. He continued ruling his kingdom, but with her beside him, advising him, reminding him of the human perspective. They traveled, they argued, they loved, they lived. She met his entire extended vampire family eventually. Some became genuine friends, others remained wary, but they all respected the bond between their king and his human. And when other vampires saw their relationship, saw how it was possible to care for someone from the other species, attitudes slowly began to shift. Not everywhere, not quickly, but change started. Wren never became a vampire. She'd made her choice, and Casimir honored it, even as the years began to show on her face small lines around her eyes, silver starting to thread through her auburn hair. He loved every change, every mark of time, because they were proof that she'd lived, really lived, not frozen in immortality like him. On their 10th anniversary of that night at the fountain, not of any official commitment ceremony, Casimir took Wren back to Central Park. They stood by the Bethesda fountain as the sun set, the city moving around them. "Do you remember that night?" Casimir asked. "When you were waiting for Marcus?" "How could I forget? Worst and best night of my life." "If you could go back knowing everything that would happen, would you still write that note?" Wren looked up at him, older now but no less beautiful in his eyes. "Yes, because even if the note was for the wrong person, it led me to the right one. Everything I went through, the fear, the danger, the complications, was worth it for this. For you. I love you," he said. "I've said it 1,000 times, but it never feels like enough. I love you too, for however much longer we have. Another 40 years at least if the blood treatments keep working." 40 years, she smiled. "That's practically no time at all for you." "It's everything to me." She kissed him as the sun finished setting, as the city lights began to glow, as their future, however long or short, stretched out before them. And in that moment, surrounded by humans who had no idea they were witnessing a vampire king and his mortal love, they were simply two people who'd found each other against impossible odds. The note that had started it all was long gone, the paper having disintegrated years ago. But Casimir had memorized every word, carried them in his immortal memory like a treasure. And sometimes, when Wren was sleeping and he was watching over her in the darkness, he'd recite them silently, remembering the courage it had taken to write them, the gift that courage had given him. She'd slipped him a note meant for another man. He'd read it and never let go. And he never would, not even after she was gone, not even across all the empty centuries that would follow. She would live forever in his memory, in his heart, proof that even monsters could love, and even the immortal could find something worth living for in a single mortal life. They had 43 years together, before Wren died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 71, Casimir's hand in hers. He kept his promise. He didn't turn her, didn't force immortality on her, even though every instinct screamed at him to save her. He let her go because she'd asked him to, because respecting her choices was how he showed his love. The grief was exactly as devastating as Lucian had predicted. For a while, Casimir withdrew from everything, barely functioning, just going through the motions. But eventually, with Lucian's help and the support of the vampires who'd come to care for Wren, he found his way back. Not to who he'd been before her, that man was gone forever, but to someone new. Someone who carried her memory like a light in the darkness. He ruled for another 200 years, never taking another lover, never forgetting the woman who'd taught him how to feel again. And when he finally chose to walk into the sun one morning, ending his long existence, his last thought was of Wren's smile, and the note she'd written so many years ago, and the impossible gift of love she'd given him. In his final moment, he hoped that wherever she was, whatever came after death, she knew that he'd kept his promise. He'd treasured every moment. She'd been worth everything, and though he'd been the vampire king, the most powerful creature in his territory, she'd been the one who truly ruled his heart. The note had been meant for someone else, but the love had been meant for him, and him alone. And that had made all the difference.